And thank you very much to the organizers for this really great event. Let me start with a brief explanation and advertisement. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Independent Evaluation Group, we're physically located inside the bank, but we are independent of management. We report directly to the board of directors and funded by the board of directors. We can say what we want. About 100 of us, and we devote our time to assessing everything that goes on at the bank, from the project level to the broad thematic level. I've just finished the third of three examinations of what the bank group is doing with respect to climate change. So that report will be out in a couple weeks. There's some sample things outside. So if you want to know what goes on in the World Bank, please give us a look. Let me build on some of the ideas that have already been presented in this meeting. Here's a brief outline of what I'd like to say. There are huge environmental problems. They're not going away as income increases. And as Andrew stressed, they're inseparable from development. They're just embedded in how we use energy, how we grow food, how we use water. So what are the responses? What are the possible things that you do to fix these problems? Well, environmental problems are almost by definition institutional problems. I'm doing something that hurts you more than it benefits me. Is there some kind of venue where we can sit down together and work it out? Having done that, though, there's need for vast investments. So I'm going to talk about those two things, but I'm going to stress an idea that Michael Kramer put up earlier, because I think this is a possible direction the bank could go, and I'll go over some examples of how it's worked in this sphere, which is namely working on demonstration, working on catalytic demonstration of innovations both in institutions and in technology, that once you demonstrate them, it reduces the risk of adoption by others and can spread spontaneously and make the whole process easier. And the reason this is important, because again, as Andrew stressed, the financial needs are immense. The amount of money that's needed is far beyond what can be commanded in any individual organization. So I'll go through some examples of engagement and talk about the challenges of whether the bank can really rise to the occasion. First, though, I know there are some environmental cognoscenti in the audience here, but I just want to briefly stress the magnitude of some of these problems. The Arctic ice cap is melting before our eyes. It reached the lowest observed level. Of course, it shrinks every summer. The lowest observed level was just a couple weeks ago. You can see in the red line, that's the average for the last 30 years up there. And this is where it is now, 2 Alaskas down from where it was normally. And this has immediate effect on how the globe's weather patterns unfold, could affect winters this coming season. Some great work done by David Lobel at Stanford. He's looking at the temperatures that are operative during the growing season of rice, wheat, corn across the world. And what they found is astounding. In these areas that are dark red, the average temperatures that affect crops nowadays are equivalent to the 1 in 40-year heat wave of just 30 years ago. And what they've also shown is that these crops are incredibly sensitive to temperature. Once you go over 30 degrees Celsius, yields drop off for every day above that limit. We've seen that in the Midwest this year. Has local implications, has implications for the global food market. Biodiversity seems to have dropped off the public discourse. 10, 15 years ago, people were really exercised about it. It's as big or a bigger a problem as it was then. Species loss is accelerating. We have no idea what the consequences are. Water. The water problem is exacerbated by climate change, but largely it's driven by increasing demand of water for agriculture. Already, nearly 3 billion people live in river basins that experience severe water scarcity at least 1 month per year. And this is getting worse, and of course it's made even worse by pollution. So what can we do about this? To give an idea of the financial challenges, the OECD estimates that the non-OECD countries will need 24 trillion in energy investments in the next 25 years, just to keep it a reasonable environmental level, and another $7 trillion if they wanted to really help make a dent in these problems we've been talking about. That doesn't even begin to include the challenge of building the cities that will house another billion people this century, of building the water management systems and so forth. Now, the World Bank has been active in all these areas, and I can't obviously go through all these examples, but the bank has been involved in both institutions, policies, and in investments. And I want to just briefly talk about some of the examples of institutional innovation and why it's important. So let's think about deforestation. Deforestation, especially tropical deforestation, is continuing apace, though Brazil has made some progress in the last 5-6 years. The basic problem really relates to what Jim Robinson was talking about the other night. You've got this big area of wealth that is ripe for being extracted. The people who live there are typically powerless. If you've got an extractivist regime, they want to grab it. You add on that the local and global externalities that are associated with cutting down trees. So what can be done about this? One thing that the bank has been heavily involved with is the creation of protected areas. National parks, things of that sort. These have been derided as being mere paper parks, but we did a fairly rigorous global analysis and found that, in fact, they're effective. They're even more effective when tenure rights are devolved to local people. I don't have a good explanation of why that's true. You wouldn't offhand expect it to be true, and you can find cases where it's not, but it's something that's out there and deserves to be built on. Payment for environmental services, where the people downstream pay the people upstream to keep the trees in place so that the runoff is clear. Bank is working in about 8 or 9 countries on this. The early results it all makes sense. Everybody should be better off. It turns out to be harder in practice than you might think. Doing the transactions, making sure they're going to the right people. It's a work in progress. Concession reform, the bank has done a number of tremendously clever things to try to address the problem of extreme corruption in timber-producing countries. We can talk about that at length. These have involved clever devices with external observers and using part of the taxes to rebate to local areas to build constituencies. They've been, I think, in my opinion, disappointing in their results, but it's a very difficult problem. We could also talk about timber certification, which is kind of an end run around weak institutions. Another innovation, I think it hasn't really demonstrated effectiveness yet. River basin management. This is a huge problem. It's an institutionally extremely difficult one. The bank has been involved in a number of different transboundary river basins. In the Mekong River Commission, where you've got countries that have a centuries-long history of conflict, trying to get them to sit down together around the same table, decide how to use the water effectively. The idea was to give them a model of the river where they could experiment with it. Again, it's taken a very long time, and they haven't quite reached agreement on this. These are efforts that probably require decades of patience to bear fruit. An interesting successful example of a technical and institutional innovation is in the high river basin of China. One of the problems with regulating, with allocating water, is knowing how much water is being actually consumed. Here they used a clever system using, how many minutes is that? Okay. Using remote sensing to measure the amount of water that's actually being consumed by the crops, use that to get people into higher value, lower water consumption crops, and it seems to be successful, though we haven't done a formal evaluation yet. A very high-level innovation was the introduction, Andrew mentioned, of the whole idea of carbon markets, a really elegant and beautiful idea. It captured people's imagination. It was part of the impetus to bring climate change to international attention. In our analysis, as practiced so far, it hasn't really made a difference on promoting clean energy investment. That's a very gross, broad generalization. We could talk more about that in detail. So here are some examples that get towards what Michael was talking about before. The idea that you could find innovations, technical innovations that people are reluctant to adopt until they've seen it demonstrated, show that it works, and then get it widely scaled up. One of my favorite examples is here on the left. The ranchers in Colombia thought they didn't want trees in the pasture because trees compete with grass. There was an experiment set up. It showed that you can go up to 20% tree cover, and that actually increases your profit because the cows get to munch on the leaves and they rest under the shade, and they're happier, and the farmers are more profitable. And this is now being spread. The bank has many things that are called demonstration projects. In our analysis, we found that only those few which actually thought about what they were trying to demonstrate, to whom, and how it would get taken up, those worked. If things that were billed as demonstration projects where they just said, well, we'll do it and the world will find out, those were less successful. So 3 big things, but very difficult things, that the bank group might be able to do to catalyze these broad solutions to these broad problems. First, promote learning about what works and what doesn't work. Here are some ex-ante assessments of the returns to renewable energy and to energy efficiency investments. Invest in wind power, you get maybe 3%, 7% return on your money and a modest carbon return. Invest in distributing compact fluorescent light bulbs to a population, you get a 100% to 800% economic return and a greater carbon return. Does this work in practice? We don't have the monitoring system set up to figure out whether this is a dream or how to build on it. $600 to $800 billion in energy subsidies every year. They go to the wrong people. They increase carbon emissions. Can we devise institutions that reduce these subsidies? Here's an example of Indonesia tried to reduce its kerosene subsidies. It gave cash grants to poor people to help wean them off the subsidies. Based on this N of 1, it seems to be well received, but there are huge political economy problems to generalizing this. Finally, anticipatory climate change. A lot of what's done in the name of climate adaptation is justifiably dealing with the threats we face today, floods and droughts and things like that. There are some things that have to be done now to anticipate the problems that are coming 30 years down the road. A lot of these have to do with land use planning. Hundreds of millions of people are going to move to cities in the coming decades. They could move in the places that are most exposed to storms and floods, or maybe a little bit away from those. Do we have the institutions that can rationally guide the growth of cities? In general, land use planning institutions, successful ones, are quite rare. So can the bank do this? Well, in terms of the demonstration projects, right now the incentives are all wrong inside the bank. As we've talked earlier about the lending culture, IEG evaluations document that the lending culture exists. It's very difficult to get incentives to work on these very expensive, low-volume projects. Maybe if there were an incentive to scale it up in the way that the DIV program exists, that would help. The bank thinks of itself as a knowledge bank, and it has a lot of knowledge. It spends $600 million a year on various kinds of knowledge products. But our recent analysis evaluation found that silos still remain, that the knowledge is not flowing anywhere near as freely as we would like. And finally, there's the problem of finding a business model that would support this kind of public good, public information good provision that we've been talking about. Thank you very much.